absolutely and positively hate sheep. Now, I know that's a bit weird coming from a minister. We're supposed to be shepherds of our own flocks, and I will admit that my favorite food growing up as a 5-year-old was lamb chops. But I just really hate sheep. I don't know how many of you who are watching have actually met a sheep, but they are the stupidest creatures quite possibly put on this planet. I remember growing up, my summers in Wales, we lived right on the edge of the Queen's Commons. Now, this meant that all of the land belonged to the Queen, and farmers, and they were all sheep farmers, had access to this land to let their flocks graze. There were so many times when sheep would just somehow get past the barbed wire, into ditches, you'd pull them out again, as a 9-year-old, not very easy to do, and then 2 minutes later the same sheep would somehow get past the barbed wire and into the ditch. And that was a rather intelligent sheep in my, opinion. Not opinion, still stupid. So anyway, whenever I look at these messages in the Bible about sheep, whenever someone is described as a shepherd, all I think is, oh, you poor, poor person. You have the hardest job possibly on the planet. So let's think. What did shepherds do? What do shepherds do now? Well, shepherds in first century Palestine were very different from shepherds in Britain that I knew, or shepherds here in the United States. First century Palestine was more of a pastoral sort of country, instead of an agricultural one. There was a great central plateau of about, imagine this, 35 miles by either 14 or 17 miles depending, that anyone could let their sheep graze in. Now this to us can seem rather idyllic. We've grown up on pictures of sheep and their shepherds. Everything seems calm, there's moonlight, there's sunshine, when in reality it wasn't quite that pleasant. Shepherds were on guard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. There were no breaks. And sheep, as I said, are rather stupid. They have a tendency to wander off. They can't quite make it back home, even if they can see home just a few feet away. I'm sorry to all sheep who are listening to this broadcast. And not only that, but there were wolves and other wild animals that would attack sheep. So a shepherd really couldn't leave his sheep for one single moment. He really couldn't sleep. Yes, he had dogs to help him, but if he closed his eyes for the wrong 10 minutes, a sheep could wander off and never be found again. And perhaps, if it was found, it would not be alive. There was also something different about shepherding 2,000 years ago. Here in America, and I apologize to everyone who is vegetarian for this, sheep are usually kept for food. A shepherd raises a sheep, gets it plump, hopefully doesn't use any harmful chemicals to achieve that, and then at some point the sheep is slaughtered. The sheep has a lifespan, not a very long one. Shepherds generally do not get attached. Their children perhaps, but not the shepherd who has done this for years and years. The sheep is always food. These sheep, however, 2,000 years ago, were not generally considered food. Their primary purpose was for the wool that they grew. A shepherd needed to keep them well fed, well watered, to be able to produce a nice woolen coat that could later be shaved off for various purposes. And once this happened, every season, the cycle would continue again. So a shepherd who had a flock would know each and every one of his sheep quite well. They would have names, most likely. Probably not the sorts of names we would use, but still, there was affection. For a sheep to wander off and find itself past barbed wire, which they didn't really have, into a ditch, or to be torn apart by wild animals, this was horrific for the shepherd. It did not only mean the loss of profit in the wool for years to come, it also meant the loss of a dear friend. Now, Jesus speaks of himself as the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd is a shepherd who is liked by his sheep. The Good Shepherd is a person who can defend his sheep, that can take care of them, that can find the lost sheep when it wanders off, that can use whatever means necessary or that are at his disposal to defend his sheep from wild animals or from thieves who might take them in the night. The Good Shepherd is one who holds a duty, and if necessary, will risk his life for his flock. Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. If we are indeed his sheep, we are quite stupid. We get ourselves into trouble. And yet, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is always there. When we wander off and stray off of our path, he doesn't mind. He loves us anyway and will come and find us. When we get into danger, when evil and temptation and harm threaten us, Jesus is the first who is there, raising up his hand, saying no and doing what he can, everything in his power, to defend our lives and our souls. Of course, when Jesus tried to explain this to his disciples, to his followers, they didn't really get it. They never really did. That's what makes reading the Gospels so interesting. If we look at John chapter 10, back to verse 7, which is at the end of our reading, Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, who of course want to trip him up. He says, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep." What does this mean? This doesn't really make much sense to us in 21st century America, sheltering in our homes. I take care of a cat, not a sheep. I do know to close the doors on him, though. He's not very happy. But as a cat mother, I know. But what does Jesus mean here? Jesus is talking about a city gate, a village gate. At this time, most dwellings had some sort of a fence around them for protection. This kept wild animals out. It kept the borders secure, or somewhat secure, and there was a clear boundary line between the town and the wilderness outside. And going in and out of these towns, in and out of these cities, there was usually only one gate. So at night, when the shepherds had let their sheep graze, and if they were coming in to the city, they would bring in their sheep through this one gate. And when this gate was closed behind their sheep, when they were taking this short respite, that gate was the protection. That gate was the shepherd. That gate kept out the wild animals. That gate kept out the thieves. And it kept the sheep from wandering off. Jesus says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture." Now, this gate was not only for the protection of sheep at this time. The idea in first century Palestine that there is a gate that stands between you and the outside world, but through which you can pass whenever you choose. This gate is comforting. This is the ultimate form of protection. Being behind a gate where nothing can hurt you, and which you can move out of freely when you choose. Then, if we look at our final verse, Jesus enumerates, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy," once again speaking about the sheep. "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." 2,000 years later, we think we know what this means. People will try to take us away. People will try to lead us astray. I did not mean to rhyme, I apologize. We see the thief as someone who hunts in the night, someone who only appears in your house to burgle it when you are no longer there, someone in the shadows. However, this was 2,000 years ago. This is not exactly what Jesus was describing. The thief is any person who is claiming to be the Savior or claiming to be the Messiah who was foretold. In Christianity, we think there was only one Messiah. It was Jesus. It's so obvious, we don't really need to spell it out even to each other. Messiah equals Jesus. The end. No discussion. However, at that time, there were a multitude of men coming out of the woodwork, coming into various organizations such as the Zealots, who wanted to overtake Rome, overthrow Rome in Palestine. There were so many of these messiahs, they were a dime a dozen. When Jesus would come out and suggest that he was the Messiah, yes, his disciples and his believers, his followers, trusted him and they knew it. But everyone else, they looked at him and thought, "Oh, you're the Messiah? I just heard this other guy was the Messiah last week when I went into the city." They knew that within a month, they'd learn of another. There were so many messiahs, no one could keep track of them. So when Jesus, in John chapter 10, verse 10, says the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, he's talking about these other messiahs. He's talking about these pretenders. He's talking about these zealots who want violence, who are using violence. But Jesus is different. He concludes by saying, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." We know what this means as Christians. We know that in the afterlife, and when Jesus comes again, for we know he will, we will have life everlasting. But there's a dichotomy in this verse if we look for it. The thief, the false Messiah, brings destruction, violence, and death. Jesus offers none of these things. He gives us safety. He gives us hope. He gives us life. Amen. As I was saying at the beginning of this sermon, sheep are incredibly stupid and simple-minded creatures. And yet, we have a fondness for them as humans. Shepherds who raise them throughout their entire lifespan, love them, name them, take care of them, risk their lives for them, not just for their wool. So what does this mean exactly? Well, think about it. Sheep have a tendency to do really stupid things like go into ditches again and again and again. I have seen sheep injured in the most bizarre ways because even if they're on flat ground, they can somehow manage to break their legs. It's a talent, really. They move in a pack. If one sheep goes off in one direction where you really don't want the sheep to go, I can guarantee you a second will follow, and then a third, and then your entire flock will be gone. There is a reason why director Ang Lee, after directing the movie Sense and Sensibility, swore never to do a movie with sheep ever again. For those of you who like movies, you know that he broke that promise about 10 years later. If we are sheep, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are simple-minded or stupid. It means, however, that we sometimes don't know what's for our own good. We might go down a path where we've gone before and end up in a ditch, bleating and needing somebody to help us out. And when our shepherd does come and help us out of that ditch, lovingly stroking our wool and hopefully giving us a bath, because sheep can get really dirty in that way, but with the mud. In 2 minutes, in 2 weeks, in 2 years, it could very easily happen again and again and again. This metaphor is not meant to be some beautifully romantic painting. It's not meant to be a gorgeous piece of music that we listen to again and again and again. You think pastoral, and you think something out of heaven. That is not what it is meant to be. And it is not meant to be insulting to either us or the sheep. What it is meant to portray is the fact that no matter whether or not we always believe in Jesus, whether or not we always follow his teachings, whether or not we're always good or even mildly decent people, no matter how many times we are angry or frustrated or sad or violent and go off into the ditch, or no matter if there's something like the thief, the false Messiah, who leads us astray, or even if we're just a simple person following the lead of another until we're part of a large flock that somehow has gotten on the wrong side of a mountain during a thunderstorm. No matter what happens, what we do, and no matter the fact that, like simple sheep, we cannot completely comprehend Jesus' message. We cannot completely comprehend why he came, why he is here, and why he will come again. It ultimately really doesn't matter. Because Jesus loves us just the way we are. Whether we make mistakes, follow the wrong lead, or completely disregard him when he's trying to tell us that if we continue going the way we're going off of a ravine. Jesus will always come. Jesus will always follow. Jesus will always love us no matter what. And that's what we need to remember during these difficult times. Now, it may seem, while we are in self-isolation, that there's really nothing bad we can do. There's nothing wrong we can do. We're just kind of sitting here, going about our lives, watching too much television, reading too many blogs, gossiping a bit too much with our friends on text message. But what we really need to understand is that Jesus knows what is going on. He knows that we are his flock. He knows each and every one of us individually, just like a shepherd would know that one sheep has a black ear and another has a brown sock. He loves us. He'll follow us off the beaten path and into the woods. He'll never abandon us. While we sit here, possibly feeling useless, he knows that there will be a time when we can once again live our lives and be useful. And whether we do so honorably and with dignity, or out of rashness and self-interest, Jesus will not judge us. Instead, if you let him, he'll put you back on the correct path and lead you home once again. Amen.